Good afternoon. Welcome back to the channel. Today is a snow day here in Shropshire, so it feels a bit like I am skiving off from doing the gardening. However, I'm not, because I'm going to be making some dried flower arrangements with you. And what I'm going to make is a lovely little Statice bauble. Hopefully it looks as attractive to you as it does to me. I'm really pleased with the results actually, so I'll show you how I made this. There's three types of Limonium that I know of. There is the common Statice, which is what I'm familiar with growing up. This is what you saw in, I'm going to say, cheap garage flowers. But it provides colour. It lasts a long time in the vase. In reality, it's a good flower to have. I appreciate it now for what it is, but really more as a dried flower. I still cringe at putting them into fresh flower arrangements, although they are perfectly good. But this is a annual. This version, Statice, so it's Limonium is the variety. Statice, which is this, is a annual. And it comes in a variety of colours. And the great thing about it is that the colour that you see here in the dried version is pretty much the colour it was in the fresh version. And they are so productive. I had about 12 plants and I had so many cut flower stems that I had to just stop picking in the end. I had nowhere else to store it. It was completely overwhelming everything else that I grew. So it is highly productive. It's just finding a use for it afterwards that I'm happy to. And hopefully I found that in the bauble that I'm going to make. But that's one variety. So it's the annual, tender annual, and highly productive Statice. We then have another version of Limonium, which is called handily, it's called pink pokers, as you can tell why. Now this equally is quite stiff, but it's got something a bit more, as I could be biased, it just seems to have a bit more character than these. Whereas these, although absolutely they're rigid, they have got a few kinks in them. They do add, they're different, and they do add a little bit of something. So putting those in a bouquet would look rather wonderful. And a bonus is that they are perennials. So I just sowed my first lot this year to see how they would go. And actually I've got very few flowers. So I am hoping next year will be the year of the pink pokers. Because first year growing of this perennial has not produced many flowers. The same can be said for this variety. Now this is Limonium Sea Lavender or Sea Spray. There's two varieties and I think it's based on the colour. And I can't remember which one this is, but it's one of the two, Sea Lavender or Sea Spray. And again, this is similar colours to the apricot Statice. Well, actually, it's not similar. That's apricot and that's pink. But it's got the same rigidity in the stems, although not as thick as the Statice. But it's much more airy. So again, having that in a flower arrangement, fresh or dried, is going to add something unusual to the arrangement, and that's one stem. This also is a perennial. And again, like the pink pokers, I didn't get much of it this year. So I'm hoping next year I'll have a bit more of a bumper crop. But the bumper crop that I have to deal with this year is the Statice. And that's why I've been trying to find something that I can make with it that is making the most of what we've got. Because I'm inside, I'm hoping the light is okay. But what you will need is a piece of chicken wire, some scissors, scissors for cutting ribbon, some wire cutting clippers, tools, and obviously your snips for cutting the flowers. So let's start with the chicken wire. I only really need a strip, so I'm going to cut down that bit, and that's all I need. I want it as small as possible. So this is quite a loose chicken wire, so I'm going to try and get perhaps 2 hexagonal wide. So let's clip through. There we go. So now I have my strip of chicken wire, and really what I'm going to do is fold in all of the sharp edges. Do be careful when you're using this because it is quite, all of the loose ends are definitely pointy. And what I'm doing is just rolling it up into a ball to try and make a structure. There we go, so I've got a few loose pieces in there, so let's just tuck those in. So it's best, it will be covered in flowers. I'm just thinking of your own safety. Make sure that you get things shoved in. So it is a ball of chicken wire, scrunched up. Try not to have it too open, because the more of the plant material you put in, it will gradually create its own infrastructure in there and stability. So it will gradually fill up with the stems of the plant, and it will become more stable. So you don't want it too open because they fall out straight away, but you don't want it too tight, otherwise you can't get the flowers in the first place. But something like that will work fine. Now get a piece of ribbon, so let's cut that. So I put the ribbon on now just so that I've got something to hold on to, really. So I'm going to find a piece that's naturally sticking upwards and centre it. And there we go. So we have a hanging structure. Now let's prepare some flowers. So what you want are some flower stems. So I have quite a lot here. It takes much more than you think. Definitely much more than you think. So let me prepare some. So obviously we don't need that length of stem. So I'm going to cut it fairly short just to get the flower heads. So that has got rid of the bulk. Now something like that, it's perfect to get started. You have a stem that will go through. It's obviously not going to go past the full extent. So that's a really good one. Something like that is not really going to work. So what I would do is snip off the flowers so that you've got something that you can stick into the structure, but it's not too big. Now these are smaller these smaller flowers will come in later. But at the moment we're looking for bigger stems. So again, that will work fine. But obviously, again, something like that will be fine. But something like that is going to be, it will just stick out too much. It's not going to blend in very nice. So let's take a few off. Trim down that stem, and we've got something that then is the bigger stem variety. Okay, we have quite a nice selection of flowers here. Now this may or may not be enough, we shall see, but let's get started. Now in some instances that flower head is a bit too sticky uppy, so in reality you'd think it would be coming out of the bauble too much. However, when you're first starting off, you can actually use the shape to its advantage. So it's got a curve on it, so you can thread that curve through. Don't worry too much about it sticking out at the end, because we can trim things off to just about making sure that it is firmly in place. And then you just carry on creating little pockets of colour. Now you need to be somewhat gentle, because in the bigger bunches like that, the flower heads fall off, but they can come in handy later on when you're trying to cover the mechanics. But to start with, again, another big piece. It's just about being able to fill up a bit of the internal mechanics so that you're forming a more rigid structure. So things will fall off and you can add to and readjust as you go. So at this point it really is just a matter of covering the base. So we're getting a little bit more full. You see, things are still a little bit loose, but as you add more and more in, then it soon tightens up. So you will find that things will fall off as you go, and you keep having to backfill. But what you're doing in doing that is creating that filled in bit within there, so things, as you put the smaller pieces in, they will hold in more tightly. So if you look at there, that looks a little odd. It seems to be more, you see, a bit too much green. So I really want to fill that out with a little bit more. So I have another piece that is, and then just put it in, and it kind of masks it a bit. So we're really, in this area, starting to need smaller stems to fit in, so you're not trying to be too brutal with it. So again, we've got this sticky out bit, and that may end up being trimmed off. I kind of like it sticking out sometimes, but it depends. Got this stem we don't want, and that's going to be too high a stem. But we can trim off at the end once we know where we are. So we are getting close to the end. It's pretty much all covered. We have some dodgy areas around about there that we just need to fill in with a bit of the smaller things. So it's all hanging in quite well, but we just want some of the smaller sections. So if we take something like that, for instance, and pop that in, it surprisingly stays in. So we just fill it in a bit more with these bits, just to make it a bit more solid. And if there's anything that looks a little odd. So you'll see here we've got bits, oh, this is the top actually, so we've got bits sticking out of it. So when you start adding in the smaller bits, it kind of locks everything into place. Now there, I think I can see too much green, so I'm just going to pad it out with a bit more colour in there. So at this point it's really just about going around your bauble and seeing how it works. Now this here, to me, there we go, it's always going to be sticking out too much. So I am, now that I've created that, you've seen the back end of the flower, so I really want something in there just to cover that up a bit more. So I'm going to shorten that stem, and then we are good to go. Putting something in that is going in a different direction kind of helps take the sameness out of it. Okay. So we have areas that look a bit flat and then round. So we can either take off that bit of flour and then pad it out with something else that squeezes in but isn't too prominent. So we have a gap there that's forming, so let's, so that's a nice little bunch there, but too long a stem. So let's see whether we can get that in. So if you kind of look at the flow of which way, there we go, fits in nicely. And really it's just doing that now to fill the gaps. And there we have it. A finished bauble. Now, there are always things that you could adjust. But to me, it's not perfectly round. The flowers aren't perfectly matching. But to me, it's perfectly imperfect. Much like everything else in nature. So, there we have it. Does it look perfect? No. Does it fill me with joy? Absolutely. It's so good to be able to take something that you've grown and create something festive, something sustainable and eco-friendly. There's nothing in here that can't be either reused or composted. No chemicals, no plastics, all just sustainable material. I'd love to see what you make with your flowers, so drop a comment below, tag me in anything on Instagram or Facebook or whatever with pictures of some of your creations. And until next time, happy flower arranging.